Please note, my Steam key for Tomba Special Edition was provided by Limited Run Games for content creation purposes. There were no attached expectations other than that I disclose that fact to you, which I'm more than happy to do. I am otherwise free to make and say whatever I wish. Tomba was one of the first games I ever played on my own PlayStation 1, back when I got one as a kid. While I'd already dabbled in games like 2 Extreme and Crash Bandicoot 2, those were on others' consoles. But my console came with a demo disc that had demos for Tomb Raider 2, Blasto, Einhander, Jersey Devil, Gex 2, Gran Turismo 1, and yes, Tomba. What captivated me about the Tomba demo was a combination of how freeform it was, and how long it was. I would regularly spend hours at a time playing that demo, highly suspicious that they'd accidentally put the full game on the disc. It would be years before I'd finally actually see the end of it. But it was also a game that nobody else I knew owned or knew about. I never saw it in shops until it was officially retro enough to cost a pretty penny. So beyond that demo, my primary experience with it was through emulation. Tomba has always been a game I love, and so it's great that Tomba Special Edition exists on modern platforms, so that people can continue to play it into the future. Note that this video is a review of this specific port, by the way, not Tomba itself, though I will discuss elements of the game along the way. I think it's important to know what you're getting into before you pick this game up. This version of Tomba is using the Chrome engine, which is fundamentally emulation, not a from-the-ground-up port. That means some things you might want or expect to have control over, even in the PC version, are going to be limited. The aim here seems to be accuracy first, which is okay with me personally as long as the original game didn't have awful performance that's mirrored here. Thankfully, I've only had minor frame rate issues here and there, running the game on PC in a 4K window. I haven't looked into whether it was genuinely hitting a bottleneck in some way, or if it was more likely a limitation of the original game, but either way, it's been absolutely and completely playable. Tomba itself is a sort of 2.5D platformer, Metroidvania, RPG light melting pot. This game is real 2.5D as well, like games like Klonoa. You can move between the foreground and background of maps by climbing up or down between them, and some areas even allow the screen to rotate by 90 degrees, introducing more spots to move between the layers. In these sections, the game is almost Fez-like in a way. As Tomba, your goal is to find your grandpa's gold bracelet, which was stolen by a band of 7 evil pigs who need as much gold as possible in order to create powerful spells that wreak havoc across the world. You can jump, you can swing from branches, you can climb walls, you can bite enemies and throw them, and you can swing a weapon, including a stronger charged swing. But along the way you also gain a wealth of upgrades, one of the earliest of which is the Animal Dash, which allows Tomba to run. You can get spell gem powers like fire that surrounds you, you can find an umbrella that allows for controlled, slower descents while in the air, you can find different weapons with alternative properties, same thing with Tomba's pants. There are status effects that are both beneficial and detrimental, and much, much more. Tomba's world is freely explorable, rather than overtly level-based. While there are absolutely distinct environments, you're expected to move between them back and forth to finish quests and solve problems. Levels will have multiple entrances and exits to other parts of the map as it expands, wrapping around in on itself like a Metroidvania world. As alluded to, there are also quests. Talking to people or looking at objects will either overtly tell Tomba of a problem that needs solving, or pique his curiosity toward exploring something out of the ordinary. This makes up the bulk of the experience, and though most of the well over 100 quests are optional, it's always worth trying to figure out the solutions to issues because you never know how valuable the reward is going to be. The difficulty of a task as well as the reward is often fairly random, giving a sense of true mystery and variety. Some are more platformer challenge oriented, while some are more like puzzles, and the people you'll often get these quests from are usually simple but interesting nonetheless. You might find an injured dog while exploring and take him back to a healer, who requires you to get different resources to help her heal the dog across the game. Or maybe someone can't stop crying and you need to go grab a healing mushroom to cure them. Or maybe you need to put out a fire completely unprompted by finding a bucket, filling it with water, dousing the fire, and then finding some cooked food in it that someone lost in the forest. She will then proceed to eat it and fart on you because this game is weird sometimes and never takes itself too seriously. Each pig boss requires finding the pig bag that will contain them, then figuring out where the entrance to their lair is before jumping on them, biting them, and throwing them in the bag. But getting to that point requires exploring and really pushing Tomba and the world to its limits. This special edition port of Tomba is $20 digitally on PC, PS5, and Switch, with a PS4 version apparently coming at a later date. No Xbox, and this is a case where I couldn't tell you why. It almost certainly isn't a technical limitation, so I'd have to imagine it's something to do with publishing rights. Either way, it wouldn't surprise me if an Xbox version also popped up eventually. The port comes with the usual extras you'd expect: screen filters, aspect ratio options, background images for aspect ratios that don't fill the screen, a rudimentary but powerful rewind feature, the ability to save and load anywhere, cleaned up pre-rendered video, and a bunch of extras: concept art, developer interviews, advertisement scans, the usual. Probably the most compelling thing for me is the remastered soundtrack. Tomba's original soundtrack still holds up, and is still there for you to use, but the remastered soundtrack is also solid, and is a nice, fresh change of pace if you've played the game a lot over the years. Rewind also helps with some of the game's more frustrating elements. While it only allows you to go backwards in chunks, it lets you go back quite a ways, and Tomba is a clever, creative game that likes to play pranks on the player quite a bit. One of the earlier areas is full of mushrooms that will replace your attack with either uncontrollable tears or laughter, which will also trigger at random, putting a halt to your inputs. And these statuses sustain into other areas because there are doors that can only be opened by crying or laughing in front of them. So sometimes you want these statuses. The only way to deal with this is to pick up one of the aforementioned respawning healing mushrooms. These can only really be found rarely within the mushroom forest itself, which is full of hazards and bottomless pits that will instantly take a life, and really put pressure on you when you're stuck with one of those status effects. It rewards careful planning and patience. Rewind is perfect for this type of area if, like me, it's one of the lulls in the experience that you just don't want to put up with. It's also good for places where you aren't sure whether something is a leap of faith or a bottomless pit. The game isn't completely heartless, mind you. You can farm the healing mushrooms if you want, since they get stored in your inventory, but also if you're exploring comprehensively, you can quickly gain access to a mushroom that will get rid of these status effects but will never run out. Beyond that, you can also grab another infinite mushroom that will give you either status effect on the spot, so that you don't have to run between the forest and the status effect doors every time. The game never crashed on me during my playtime before writing this video, and my controller worked perfectly right out of the box. While I would have liked options for scaling the resolution of the 3D assets more directly, I think the treatment for them, the 2D assets like the pre-rendered backgrounds, the UI and text, it all fits one of my general preferences rather than looking garish, messy, and inconsistent. This is a port that feels like it had a specific vision and got the attention it needed, and I can appreciate that, even if it leaves some stuff on the table. There are really only two issues that I found while playing, which were a sound effect that didn't play back as it did in the original, and a square in the saving menu that I assume is supposed to be a snapshot of where you saved, that always just kind of displayed a smeary mess of Neapolitan ice cream colors. When it comes to remastering efforts for games this old, I always like to give a bit of leeway, since you never know what struggles needed to be overcome to make it happen. A lot of these games from back then are lost to time, and the only ways to port them are through emulation, or through painfully spending way too much time and money decompiling a retail version, which simply might not match up with the sales expectations the product has. And I'd rather get a functional, polished, but limited port of Tomba that's emulated than none at all. As far as the price, I'm kind of on the fence about it. On the one hand, I love Tomba. It's a long, deep, unique, and creatively rich game that still absolutely deserves to be played today. And from that perspective, getting to play it on modern hardware with achievement or trophy support is wonderful, especially with the extras. On the other hand, while it's not near as egregious as something like being expected to spend $60 on a port of Hitman Absolution, it's also not quite as compelling of a value as getting a bunch of classic Mega Man or Castlevania games that are being emulated for $20. It's a much better value than some of its competitors in this space, but it's also not quite as good as some of the others, though Tomba itself is a lot of game, which is absolutely something you can't say for some of the others. It still holds up better than a lot of these games in retro packages. I can't say how impractical this would have been, but including the much lesser known Tomba 2 in the package would have sweetened the deal tenfold. Here's to hoping that's coming down the pipeline too. Whether or not Tomba Special Edition is worth the fairly low $20 asking price for you is entirely up to you. But given the quality of the porting work, the extras, and the fact that Tomba is a comprehensive, one-of-a-kind experience, it's definitely something that leads me to recommend it, especially if you want to see more quality ports of games that could otherwise be forgotten. Tomba gets my full recommendation. Tomba Special Edition also gets my recommendation, though it's a bit lighter unless you find it on sale.